Hello, and I want to spend a little bit of time today talking to you about the context of the murder of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. It's all over the press this week, understandably so, and the whole football community this weekend has come together with applause being given at minute 6 of the game. He was 6-year-old when he was murdered by the very people who were in a place where they should have been caring for him. I've been involved in delivering safeguarding training for many years now. We've worked with higher education organisations, with schools, colleges, and with support services. And the materials that you're about to see, they've been put together from information given to us following our attendance at updating safeguarding events. So there's good provenance here. The single most annoying phrase I hear at times like this, and there are too many of them, is that lessons should be learned. I would take issue with that and say that lessons that have been learned need to be applied. So let's take a look at some of the materials that I've used, that we've used, and let's see if that helps explain as much as is possible how this might have happened. At this point, I need to emphasise that the full responsibility for the murder of Arthur lies with those who perpetrated the offence. Thanks. And so here we go. Here's a little bit of background for you, so you can just see how this supports the statement made on the opening remarks from me. And the dangerous partnerships I'm referring to here are the partnerships between carers, alleged carers, people who should care, and then there's the whole statutory partnerships between people who are placed in positions of care and looking after children, their own children, where this breaks down, and then when the local authorities, care teams get involved. So this isn't about a blaming or a finger pointing exercise. It's trying to get some insights into what goes wrong and why. And as you can see here, I'm using some quite dated information. I mean, deaths of children who these occurred between 1973 and 1989, and the report was assembled in 1993. What I think is relevant about this is that the circumstances and the sequence of events have remained broadly the same. And just by way of check back, you can see here, these are the dangerous partnerships that emerged. I hope you can see here that there are no standard answers and very few sort of standard setups. So if we take a look at the third bullet, where the natural parent was involved in the death of the children and exclusively responsible, so involvement goes to 71% and exclusively responsible 54%, and that has some relevance to the current situation. And also when we take a look at step parents being involved with and then exclusively responsible, you can see the exclusively responsible figures are quite low, 14%, but that really shouldn't get in the way of having some quite critical and I suppose difficult to manage thoughts about what has taken place quite recently. So we start to maybe get into the very sensitive areas and quite upsetting areas about main patterns of abuse. And let's just remind ourselves that these were identified many years ago, 1993 this was reported on, so we're a fair way down the road since then. Take a look at that pattern there and we can fit it. It almost feels like a template, doesn't it, to what has happened. And if we take a look at bullet 3, the idea that a human being ceases to exist or to have relevance, you don't matter in the minds of parents, and that was shut away until he or she died. Again, it's unpleasant, difficult and challenging, but I think it's very important that we understand that we knew all this before. There's some quite broad findings here about what goes wrong. We hear the expression slip through the net, don't we? But actually it's far more complex than that and far more interrelated. So we do get examples of where professionals try time and time again to meet a parent or carer's chronic dependence needs, and it simply doesn't work. There seems to be a pattern is that there is always another thing to do. It would be all right if only. We also find from the study that there's a tendency for parents to shut themselves down, to just get away from professionals, and I think we saw some of that, the refusal to answer a door, they're not in, no contact details, and that you can take a look at the third part there, flight, where they simply move and don't register with services in the areas into which they move. And you'll understand now that even though that this doesn't seem to be the contemporary case, that we actually do live in for some sections of our society, a highly mobile, almost transient context, and that makes the problem harder rather than easier. One, to recognise, and two, to begin to address. So what else can get in the way of sometimes exceptionally busy, overworked professional people who are attempting to deliver support in sometimes the most challenging of circumstances? Well, there's this one, disguised compliance, where parents, carers will go through the motions, if we can put it that way, of complying with the advice and support that they're being given, but they're not actually doing it. This cuts down the latitude of interventions that that support workers can bring to bear, because you sort of have to prove that there's low levels of cooperation, and for the families it's their job to prove that they are cooperating. So that really does complicate and slow things down. Well, let's take a look here and contextualise it, and we can see that in a third of the study, the critical events where things got desperately out of control, resulting in serious injury or death, occurred, as you can see, weekends, public holidays, or maybe when a key worker was on leave. I'd like us to think about lockdown and how closely that parallels a long and tortuous holiday where the perpetrators have basically got the victim to themselves. And some comments made here now about what happens within professional networks, closed systems, where one group holds a dominant view, and that means that if we're unable to consider all of the views, then some very important information may be withheld, or it's not taken account of. We can also see that distance grows between workers, and when that happens, we see less rather than more sharing of information. Now, I want to make it very clear here that I am aware of the massive efforts that have been made to counter this. However, I think we do need to at least nod in a direction that this has informed the research, and it might say a lot more about the way organisations are formed up, but also about the pressure, the caseload pressure that people are working under. And so here's a continuation for you, where exaggeration of hierarchies has an effect that people who perceive themselves to be less well placed in the hierarchy are maybe reluctant to offer their opinions, their views, and then also where there's uncertainty about what your role actually is. Was it my job to do that? And again, I want to emphasise that I know we have come a long way since the 90s when this was written. However, I think it is well worth emphasising that hierarchical exaggerations, silo behaviour and role confusion can re-emerge where we have pressures placed on time, on training, on recruitment and retention, and simply the amount of boots on the floor we have to deliver a service. I think we also need to consider just what happens when people are under pressure, and that pressure has been created, as I've already indicated, because of resources that prevent recruitment and training, and simply getting a number of people on the ground that's needed, but also when we're working in stressed and pressure situations that are difficult to manage and coordinate. It's my view that we are vulnerable to returning to systems almost by default that have served us very badly. So, how do we control information flows? How do we make sure that everyone who should be contributing to case discussions and to information is actually able to do that? And here's something that we really do need to check ourselves on, and this comes through, in my view, great supervision, so that the rule of selective optimism is challenged by line managers. Is this what we are actually seeing? Where's the evidence for it? This sounds far better than it should be. So where's the challenge in the work systems or workflow systems that keep our professionals attuned to the serious nature of the job? Add to that the intentionally deviant behaviour of those who would perpetrate harm on children, and you can, I hope, have a flavour of just how challenging it can be. And look, here's another example of how beliefs, if these beliefs aren't held up to challenge to professional rigour, to testing, if we don't regularly update, if we don't give ourselves the opportunity for the best training and development available, how much are we driven by pervasive belief systems that influence our decision making, but actually place the targets of abuse in much more vulnerable, dangerous, life-threatening and life-ending situations? Okay, thanks for your time. Not an easy clip to watch, and my intention was to, I guess, create a little bit of space where we could step back from some of the heat, understandable distress, anger, sorrow that accompany this particular piece of casework. And I'm sure for all of us that the images of that will be just seared on our minds for a long time. And maybe for some of us who have been involved in safeguarding, this image joins quite a long catalogue of children who have met an untimely death because of those who set out to harm them, and gaps in the system that gave them space in which to perpetrate that harm. I need to make it very clear that the people responsible for Arthur's death are his stepmom and his father. I hope you'll be able to see that the manner in which they isolated him from family, from those who would have supported and helped him, is consistent with behaviours that were noted in the period of the research, 1973 to 1989. So those behaviours are consistent, we know about them, and that the COVID provided, almost through lockdown, the perfect opportunity to isolate that child, and then for the destructive forces to take over, and maybe our capacity to respond was nowhere near as good as it should have been. It's not an effort to exonerate people who perhaps haven't done their job as well as they should. That will emerge in the serious case review. I want to, at this point, give a personal acknowledgement to the truly great people and brilliant professionals I've worked with throughout my career on safeguarding, and how many miles they've gone, and the dedication they've shown to ensure that children and young people don't end up in this situation, and to just note that much of that brilliant work goes unreported. That doesn't in any way dilute the terrible impacts of what has happened to Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. And as we close, I think it's probably right that we just hold his memory in our minds for a little while, and hope that this searingly difficult case might see a beginning of an end to the opportunities that exist for desperately damaged people to perpetrate their harm on innocent children who can't look after themselves. Thank you.